November 22nd marks the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination, adding poignancy to the new appointment of Carolyn Kennedy as ambassador to Japan. The Japanese already had a close bond with the Kennedy family. JFK was injured in Japan during World War II, but he maintained a relationship in later years and was planning to visit Japan when he was killed. We're going to take a look back at history and a look forward to history in the making.
President Kennedy died
on November 22, 1963, eyes glued to their television sets, millions of Americans find out their president has died. The assassination of John Kennedy leaves the nation in a state of shock. Over the next few days, events unfold swiftly, and only television is able to inform the public in real time. Bob Huffaker was a reporter for CBS at the time. He says this was a turning point in the media industry.
We were beginning to realize that television news was never going to be the same again. That now that we had begun to cover news from the spot, we would never go back again.
For the first time in U.S. history, 3 television channels, CBS, ABC, and NBC, broadcast live for over 72 hours. 3 days after the attack, the suspected murderer, Lee Harvey Oswald, was gunned down by nightclub owner Jack Ruby in full view of television cameras. It was the first live murder in history.
By 6 o'clock that night, 97% of the TV sets owned in the United States were on and stayed on, and people were glued to the coverage. The newspapers were doing what they could do, but things were happening so fast that it was a radio and television reporting event.
Newspapers struggled to keep up the pace set by television, but the world was already adapting to the constraints of broadcast journalism.
Suddenly, and I saw this happen within days of the assassination, people were holding press conferences, and they were holding up till the TV cameras all got set up.
In the space of a weekend, television became the main source of information for many Americans, and it was to remain so for the next 40 years, until the advent of social media.
Dee Dee Benkie, Dr. Bart Rossi continue our discussions, and we are also joined by Dr. Robert Kubey, professor of media relations at Rutgers University. No, that was such an interesting point right there, that this was one of the first live murders, really, when you think about it. And I never thought about it in that context before. But this is so much similar to something like 9/11, where everybody remembers where they were. Of course, we weren't alive during Kennedy's murder or assassination, but everybody remembers where they were. Why was this such a historical event, obviously a historical event, but from where everybody can remember exactly where they were, Dr. Bart?
Well, I think it hit them in such a profound way that they remember it. But I also think that where we're going with this segment really is it changed the media.
Well, yes.
It changed everything.
But I wanted to start off just because it was one of the things I always remember is people would tell you where they were when Kennedy was killed.
I think because it was such a profound effect on them, it was so overwhelming, and that they could be struck by this through the TV and they just and radio, and the shock of it all really had an impact on everybody.
And Dr. Kubey, obviously you are a professor of media relations, but talk to me about how this changed everything from a media standpoint. Obviously, those iconic pictures of Walter Cronkite, and obviously seeing the first murder, but just... Right.
Well, I'll expand it first by just saying almost everything that Kennedy did on TV was breakthrough. The first debate on television, the youngest president ever elected, the aftermath of the presidency. I mean, there's just one after another new thing. But when we just go to the assassination, it was shocking beyond comprehension. In contrast to 9/11, and you have to be old enough to remember this, there were no TV ads that ran that whole weekend. No TV ads.
4 days. 4 days.
For 4 days. I mean, and you understand that in part. This didn't happen after 9/11. There were moments of sobriety and somberness when they weren't going to run any ads, but they didn't keep to it. Whereas when Kennedy died, there was nothing. And it would have been horrible when they were marching the caissons down Pennsylvania Avenue to suddenly break for a kitty litter ad would have just been so horrendous that the kitty litter ad would have flipped. And moreover, they canceled soap operas, and they did get some.
I thought they had nonstop of just the Kennedy coverage. No
They did.
shows, no programming, let alone commercials.
That was it.
Not even programming.
Well, in today's world of 24/7 news, and if we can go back to 9/11, and I'm trying to remember because I was actually on the air, but when did they, was it 2 days where they didn't have any
He
ads?
was shot on a Friday. Ironically, it'll be the 50th anniversary is this Friday, the 22nd. He was shot on a Friday. Oswald, we were on the way, my family was on the way to Sunday school on a Sunday morning when we heard Oswald got it on the car radio. So it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I don't even think of it as 4 days, except when you add the funeral, which was probably Monday.
Right.
It was horrendous. It was unforgettable. The only thing that was, in a way, for me, more nightmarish was because I was only 11. So 4 years later, when Bobby Kennedy was killed on June 6, 1968 in the Ambassador Hotel, it was like a nightmare all over again. In fact, I was talking to a professor at Rutgers just the other day who said, that was the end for me of my involvement in democratic politics or in politics in this country. He said, I don't believe I can trust the system anymore. That was his reaction. It's not my reaction, but.
Well, and there were so many other images. There was the image of John F. Kennedy Jr. saluting. I mean, that was just stays with you and resonates for years, even though we weren't old enough to, we weren't born yet. But Dee Dee, what are your thoughts on all this?
I think it was poignant because he was so young. He had 2 little kids, he had a beautiful wife. It was the Camelot, and he was very, very popular. So, not that if you had a hated president, it would make a difference. We'd all be very sad if any, because there were 3 presidents assassinated before Kennedy, with Garfield, McKinley, and of course Lincoln. And Lincoln, the whole country mourned so much. So it was similar to that, I think, where, when a country loses its president, they lose their beloved president. I mean, it gives me chills now thinking about President Obama, if it happened to him, it happened to President Bush. And I thought about that often when I worked for President Bush, thinking whenever they talk about Kennedy, I was like, my goodness, how terrible and gut-wrenching it would be if something happened to President Bush, if he died. I mean, these are just terrible thoughts.
I can add to this. There was a way in which it was more a death in the family than normally, because the kids were so young. We had a sense of knowing the family. We had, and she had done those White House tours, so we had a sense of Jackie. And
That's a really interesting point. I've never thought about it that way, that it was like a death in the family and because you knew them. And everybody had a TV at that point.
And then the other thing I want to suggest, it didn't happen so much with the Kennedy assassination, is that TV acts, and you might appreciate this because you're a psychologist and I'm a psychologist, the TV, many times, there's a horrible thing that happens, and TV gets you more and more upset about it as you begin to learn about it. The marathon bombing last year, or 9/11 or whatever, then it acts like a psychotherapist coming in to calm everybody down. And there's a thing about mastering one's anxiety by repeating stories. It's one of the reasons children love fairy tales. Horrible things happening in fairy tales, right? You burning up witches in ovens, but a child learns to master anxiety via hearing those stories over and over again. So with the Kennedy assassination, you begin to see it as more normative. The more times you get through it, you begin to kind of, okay, it happened. You begin to integrate it into your
But also
psyche.
on the other side, it's the first time you see the visuals. You see these terrible visuals that you cannot get out of your mind.
Yeah, and
Except there's a Zapruder film we didn't see for 7 years, which is important to know.
But what I get out of it, though, is that it changed the way the media operated. This was an ongoing and developing event. For the first time, the media really got a picture of what it is to have a developing event of this magnitude, or nothing quite like this ever before, of course. But then the media people actually became part of the whole process. So it really changed media, and it changed the way we look at TV and the way we get our information, and personalities involved in reporting, and you probably relate to that, reporting this news.
Well, and I want to go back to your point. Why was it 7 years?
It was suppressed. In fact, I didn't see it because until then, it kept me up 2 nights. I was at UC Santa Cruz as an undergraduate, a guy named Rusty Rhodes, who had been in Lee Garrison's office. Lee Garrison had been the district attorney in New Orleans, who had been bringing unusual claims about who had really killed Kennedy. He was a major conspiracy theorist with a lot of good data on his side. I mean, let's remember, Oswald was walking around with free play for Cuba signs, and he was on TV news. Then remember, too, important to remember, that when he was being walked through the Dallas police station, he kept saying, I'm a patsy, I'm a patsy. Now, he was either lying or he was trying to claim, and I don't know that it might not be true, that he was set up.
Well, let me ask you another question, and this is a question for all of us. How has the media contributed to things like the conspiracy theories, the mafia involvement, blaming communists? There were all sorts of different. But how? We'll start with you, Dee Dee.
I don't think that's the way it went down. I am a conspiracy theorist. I mean, after reading and being, you know, a student of history, it's like, you know, this just does not add up to me. It never did. I don't believe it. I don't. I think there's more to the story.
But how has the media kept this going? I mean, obviously it's been for 50 years.
And
I was just going to say for 50 years.
There were 1,000, I think it said 1,000 books written just this year because it's the 50th anniversary. But so many things went wrong. Now, when I was younger, I couldn't understand. I really couldn't, because I was sort of became a buff for a while. I read a lot of stuff about it. I thought, well, there seems to be evidence that the FBI was involved. Because when you see Ruby kill Oswald, it's like a mafia hit. He comes in there with the snub-nosed 38. He gets in there, he plugs him like this. Johnson's on the phone minutes later with the surgeons trying to get a confession out of him, which is very suspicious.
Yeah, very.
Right? Then the CIA looks like it has involvement. Then it looks like the Cubans have involvement, because we had tried to knock out Cuba for a while. So I thought, all these things can't be true. And then it dawned on me one day, what if they're all true? First of all, couldn't it be possible, when the CIA gets involved, there are 10,000 people at the CIA. All you need is 8 renegade people in the CIA to say, okay, we're going to do this. And the CIA and the police always have connections with the FBI.
Of course.
So all kinds of things could be set up. I don't want to worry your audience, but all I'll say is after I saw it, and I was 18 or 19 years old, I went to bed that night thinking, my God, I don't know my country. There was, if not a military coup, there was a coup that day. Someone in the government and other people, for a while there were people who thought, of course, it was the Russians, because he was a Russian sympathizer. He was fluent in Russian. He'd been stationed there. He married a general's daughter, Marina Oswald.
And Dee Dee, you said you were a conspiracy theorist as well.
Well, on this I am, because it doesn't add up. It never did. That's why I think the press keeps it going, because it's fascinating. Nobody really, how can you believe that?
Yeah, but I think to Mia's question, though, and it's a really good one, is that the media can't help but be a part of this, because they're reporting all of these different aspects of this assassination, so that it gets your mind thinking, well, how could it add up, and how does this really work out in my own mind? So the media is a part of that.
Well, and I think for the younger people who weren't born before that, there is a certain fascination. But I find it unbelievable that you can go into a store and you still see, you know, Jackie Onassis and President Kennedy on the cover of magazines.
They're this beautiful couple, and they were so popular, and with their beautiful children, and it was just, you know, so heartbreaking.
You couldn't write fiction.
Yeah, you couldn't. It was a fairy tale. I mean,
I'll tell you something else. This is my hope that'll probably never happen. Although we saw it with J.D. Salinger when he died. A lot of people said maybe he's writing stuff, and here we are 3 to 5 years after his death, all this stuff comes out. I have hoped, because I'd like to see some resolution just like you would. I've thought maybe the 1 or 2 or 3 people who were behind it have sealed off with their lawyers what they did, and said 10 years after, or 20 years after every member of my family is dead,
right,
we will release. And it's partly a pipe dream on my part. It probably will never come to fruition.
I think it will, though. I think
like this idea?
Yeah, I do.
I think it may come to fruition. Someone's going, and they'd have to prove it. They're going to say, I was hired. Look at the same people who were involved in the Bay of Pigs were the same people who were involved with breaking into Watergate.
There's no way.
Well, also, our current Secretary of State doesn't really believe it either. He apparently feels that there's some kind of a conspiracy.
You know, and reporters, they're naturally investigators. You know, they investigate, so they continue to do that because I think it's just the nature of what they do.
Well, we could continue to debate this, and obviously it's probably going to be something that's going to be debated for the next 50 years. Absolutely. All right, there's much more to come here on Fresh Outlook. The lightning round is next.